as a performer, the most important thing for me is to know what I'm aiming for and to know when I finished, did I achieve what I was trying to achieve?
As I was heading to Australia in the fall of 2019, I reached out to Rob Nairn, who organizes the Melbourne BassDay, the biggest event of bassists, the gathering of bassists in Australia. And I said, who should I talk to for the podcast while I'm here, getting together with them in person in their country? And at the top of that list was today's guest. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting today with Kees Boersma, who is principal bass of the Sydney Symphony and has been that since 1990. He also teaches at the Conservatorium of Music there, and he's an active clinician. He was one of the headliners at the Melbourne BassDay. And he's just a great guy. I had such a great time hanging out with him. I'm laughing because we start off with this insane story that he told me about that tour in China. And we dig into, in addition to the craziness and high points too, of course, being on tour, we talk about what it's like playing in that orchestra, playing in the Sydney Opera House, that iconic landmark, one of the world's great performance spaces, and dig into what he played on his recital for the Melbourne BassDay and much more. We were hanging out in Fitzroy, which is a great neighborhood in Melbourne. I was staying there, having some coffee and chatting, and I just love doing conversations like this. So thank you, Kees, and I know you're going to love this one. The quick shout out to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, Upton Bass, Steve Swan String Bass, The Bass Violin Shop, Modacity, Colstein Music, and A440 Violin Shop. More on them later, but let's dig into this conversation with Kees Boersma. We're in your old neighborhood, right?
We are. It's an amazing place to sit and have a coffee with you and have a chat, because I've just come back to the place, well, for me, where I started in terms of studying music after leaving home in Fitzroy, Melbourne, Victoria, the day after this bass day here in Melbourne, and it's just fantastic walking around a place I used to be around and study way back in the mid-'80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was great to hear you last night. You Fuchs Sonata, right?
Fuchs Sonata.
And then the wonderful
Careful
Glier.
how you say that.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, I've had students laugh when I say that composer's name. And then the Glier 4 pieces, and then
Yes.
this really cool Under the Dome piece you played too.
That's called piece by Sydney composer Alan Holly, called Dome Music. He wrote this piece for me about 8 years ago, and I keep coming back when I get a chance to play in a recital situation like this. I've come back to this piece a couple of times. I find it very effective. It's sort of daunting in some of the technical aspects of the piece, but I think it's got a really great atmosphere, and for me, it really works as a concert piece. So I really enjoyed playing that again last night as well. The Fuchs Sonata was made known to me by a colleague in Sydney a couple of years ago. He was a friend of Brahms, and it's just beautiful having a sonata written for the bass of that period. And it's a lovely and quite charming sonata. So very enjoyable to play, and just made me realize, sitting on stage with a good pianist in a lovely hall with an appreciative audience, it's a wonderful sensation playing the bass like that, with a piece written for the instrument that I think works really well. Really enjoyable. And then the Alan Holly was a real contrast to that. And of course the Glier 4 pieces I've always enjoyed. And talking about coming back to where I started, that when I was at college here at the Victorian College of the Arts, in the day of the students only being able to hear what there was in their library record collection, there were, I think, 6 double bass records. Sure. One of them was Larry Wolff playing the Glier pieces, and that was one of my favorite recordings. It was beautiful. He's a wonderful man. The playing on that recording is great, and it's just great being able to play them again here in Melbourne.
Isn't that such a great record? That's one of my all-time, one of the few LPs I actually bought with my own money. And I remember, and my teacher actually studied with Larry Wolff for a while. He was just such a major, I learned those 4 pieces. I basically tried to copy everything I heard in Larry's playing.
Yes.
And it's really amazing how that album, there are a few of those bass albums back, kind of the dark ages of the bass. You got the Gary Carr couple albums.
Exactly.
That Larry
I was
Wolff.
thinking that one too. The Gary Carr record with the Eckel Sonata and, wonderful playing.
Yeah.
Still, if I hear back, I've got some favorite records. Another one is František Pošta, the Granchino bass of František Pošta, who was he was principal on Czech Phil for 40 years and a wonderful. By the time I met him, he came to Australia a couple of times, and he was really important for those of us living here. He would have been, I guess, 60 or in his 60s. This beautiful, gentle, super musical man performing these wonderful works. We bought his record, and it's always been a favorite. It's a particular sound quality, his use of vibrato, portamento, and this very heartfelt style of playing, which even then in those days I thought, by the time I get to your age, I still want to be motivated to try and play like that. And it's been a sort of he was a motivating force also for me.
Yeah, that's one of those records that I'm familiar with, but it didn't get to the States as much as some others. It's something I discovered later in life. But it's so cool that he was coming to Australia and working. I know he's huge influence on all kinds of people. I remember David Hayes, bass teacher and composer and performer, going to the Czech Republic regularly to connect with him and studied with him. And
special place, special music. I love the music of Czechoslovakia, and there's something about that. The quality of music, which is a little different from the Teutonic style of music making, which, I don't know, it has a real, an earthiness and a human side to the music, which I really like.
Yeah. Well, and so I got it. So you're here in Melbourne today. In between engagements with the symphony, and I actually got a chance to see you play at the Opera House a few days ago, Messiaen, which is very cool.
Yes,
and
Tarangalila Symphony,
which
monumental work.
Yeah, quite a piece, an amazing piece.
Yeah, it is.
And just for me to come to Sydney to see in that iconic place that you've been playing now, this is your 30th.
Well, technically,
season?
I'm just finishing my 30th season, but I started in 1990 with the orchestra. So next year will be my 31st season with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, which actually sounds quite a long time. But people do tend to hang around for a while in those positions. So and I've really, really enjoyed it, the time with the orchestra. So still learning. And it's always changing, always changing. Not just different conductors, different works, different soloists. I'm talking about a lot of people, new, young, talented musicians come into the orchestra who, inspire and challenge and make you realize you've got to really keep working on your game to not just not to keep up, but to sort of try to progress. Because the standard of the orchestra, it does not stay stagnant. It is improving all the time. And if you want to be part of that improvement, you've got to work too. And I enjoy that. It's very motivating.
Well, a friend of mine that I know from Chicago and Milwaukee, Andy Ricidi.
Oh, yes. He was one of my colleagues.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember asking him, like, how could you move from Sydney, Australia, to Milwaukee, Wisconsin?
I still wonder that myself.
I know. Sorry, but Wisconsin, I love you. I've spent a lot of time in Wisconsin, so I could say that. But I just remember thinking that was inconceivable. I remember asking him just of the experience of like, what's it like to play at that hall that I've seen so many photos of? And then it was so cool this week, you took me backstage and I got to actually see.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's an operation I've never seen. Can you just talk about, because probably, I'm guessing most people haven't been to that hall who are listening to this. Like,
right.
Can you just talk about how that's constructed and the common spaces?
Sure.
And,
So, I mean, most people will have seen at least a photograph of the Opera House. So there are two shell structures side by side. So the largest of the two main performance shells is for the concert hall where we perform. Sydney Symphony Orchestra perform 35 weeks a year, and the rest of the time it is being used for all sorts of any other type of performances, rock concerts, school presentations, whatever. Whoever's willing to hire the place.
Oh man, getting our high school graduation in the Sydney Opera House would be
it would.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's not the sort of school I went to, unfortunately. And then the other shell is where both the opera and ballet performances occur, which is also a full-time operation with a separate orchestra, the Australian Opera Orchestra. And so they take care of performances from the Australian Opera and the Australian Ballet. roughly the opera 7 months a year, and the Australian ballet the rest of the time for 4 to 5 months a year. So
what I learned this week and spending time with you and Kirsty, your wife, is that the intent of the halls was different when they were built, right? So
I've actually just purchased a book called The House, which is a really great book describing the history of the Opera House. And I've realized in the last few years that my knowledge of some of the workings, I'm aware of quite a few of what happened when the Opera House was being constructed and the frustrations with Johan Utzon, the wonderful Danish architect who left Australia before the building was completed, and the fact that it was completed on the behest of the New South Wales government. And, of course, a lot of controversies you can expect with these sorts of projects. But my understanding of the hall initially was that the main shell was going to be used as more of a multi-purpose venue, so the opera and the ballet were able to use it as well, which would have incorporated the machinery required for set changes, etc. When it was decided that the large shell was going to be a concert hall exclusively for the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, then that machinery was not needed, of course, and so it arrived in Australia and was scrapped. So there's some interesting history with that building. But currently the two shells operate independently, and we have a green room, a meeting place for the artists in the sort of space in between those two shells. And that's a great meeting place. There's a pretty good cafe, kitchen, and a very good view to Sydney Harbour, where you can occasionally see some pods of dolphins going past and the ocean liner. So it's a lovely spot to hang out in between rehearsals when you just need a bit of time to have a coffee. And it's a special, having been around a lot of the concert halls around the world, it is quite an individual experience.
Yeah, that's putting it modestly. Okay. I've never seen a green room. I mean, calling it a green room is like it's. I mean, I guess technically it is, but this cafeteria. I mean, it feels like a musician high-end mall or something. And with this insane view. And then I also learned. So the plan what ended up being the architectural design was one that was initially rejected, I think, right? Wasn't that?
Yeah, well, the idea that it was possible to construct a building like this was met with suspicion, I guess. So it was quite a process for Johan Utzon to give the people responsible confidence to think that it could be built. And if you look at the early drawings, the Opera House was lower, flatter, and slightly more elongated. And the design we have now is slightly higher, and I guess that would mean, not being an engineer, that the sort of rigidity and strength was maximized with the current design. So
okay,
it's a little different, but the overall concept was so radically different from anything else. It was really interesting seeing. There's an exhibition at the Opera House of some drawings of some of the other entrants for that competition, and you have some interesting ones and some very, very straightforward square boxes. And this design is so wonderful because, it's a bit like the Elbphilharmonie in Hamburg, something that sits on the water and sort of projects into the water or next to the water. It has like a relationship with water, which it's very, very evocative. And having cycled to the Opera House for that amount of time and still every day to arrive feeling quite elated seeing this beautiful, beautiful building. It's a pretty good office to have to go to every day, yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass. And Steve has been researching top regraduation for many years. Here's Steve on the topic.
I found some old diagrammed bass tops in an old violin making book that had violins, violas, cellos, and only 4 basses from kind of the classic period, the early 1800s. And I took a pattern of kind of a topographical map of thicker in the center under the bridge, and then, the thinnest is right near the edges, just before it flares out and gets strong again. And I put in some measurements that I thought would work, and we use that as a general pattern for top regraduation, and it really works.
You would be amazed how well this technique works. I've been impressed time and time again at how immediately a bass speaks after coming from Steve's shop, and how resonant and beautiful and open the sound is. Learn more at steveswanstringbass.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast, Steve. There are so many things to think about when you're practicing. Where do you even begin? Here is Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on what to prioritize in your practicing.
First things first, you got to measure time. Time is of the essence. You want to get the highest return on your time investment, and the way to do that is through listening to yourself and self-recording. Almost everybody who reads the blogs of Rob Knopper, Noah Kageyama, everybody knows self-recording is absolutely essential. So we put it front and center along with time.
Recording yourself, measuring the time you've spent on particular sections, and so many other things are available in Modacity. I love this app so much. You can learn more at modacity.co. And if you visit our website, we've got a special offer for lifetime access to the app. Check it out. You'll love it. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Apply graphite, like pencil lead, to the bridge and nut, the contact points of the string, to ensure the strings slide smoothly on their way up to tension. This prevents them from getting stuck and unwinding or pulling the bridge so that it leans. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast.
And I feel lucky just to get a chance to see a concert there, but also because it's going to undergo a 2-year renovation,
yes,
acoustic
right.
and otherwise.
Yeah.
And I remember back, I'm thinking back to the early 90s when I was a student in Chicago. Chicago Symphony was going through these renovations, and you'd go in one day, and they'd torn out all the panels in the back, and you would just see this stone, and then they had to put up all these poles, and it was this awkward kind of like molting period where they kind of but what are some of the changes that are getting put in place acoustically?
Well, I'll just deal with the acoustic aspects. There are some other major things with regards to looking after our patrons, because we do like it when people come to our concerts.
Yeah.
And so the use of escalators instead of massive numbers of stone stairs, which, are quite impressive looking, but awkward for people who are aging people and less mobile patrons, if you like. So they're dealing with that sort of stuff as well, which is really important. But the acoustic side is, some of the big things are a new stage, a hydraulically operated amphitheater-style staging, which with much greater flexibility, along the lines of Suntory Hall in Japan, so that's a really big thing. So that means the orchestra will sit differently. I think that we have experimented with a mock-up of that setup, just for the purposes of spatial configurations and measurements and dimensions, and you just feel closer to your colleagues. So immediately there's a different effect. It's a little bit like playing in the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, or also that sort of semicircular idea, or Boston Symphony Hall, where you just feel more engaged with each other. So there's the visual aspect and the closeness, the physical closeness, the sensation of that helps. Another major thing is an actual proper acoustic ceiling over the orchestra, because what we have now is, what do they call it? They're semicircular perspex rings, which don't work that well.
Right.
So acoustically, they're not ideal, and they don't reflect the reverberations that we need to hear each other properly. Yeah. So there'll be a great improvement there. Yeah.
Well, some of those great halls, I've gotten the chance to play at the Concertgebouw and some of those other halls. And you saying the Concertgebouw reminded me, you're originally from the Netherlands.
Yes,
right?
I was born in the Netherlands. My family migrated to Australia when I was young.
Okay.
But I returned. I've always had a thing about that orchestra, the Concertgebouw Orchestra. So much of, we were talking about recordings, favorite recordings.
Yeah.
I've always been, I was drawn to symphonic recordings as well. Of course, my first CD, that would have been just post 1983, I guess. My first CD was the complete Stravinsky Firebird with Concertgebouw and Bernard Haitink, and just some recordings stick in your head that are very evocative and beautiful. And so I sort of, as I became more aware, I guess, re in touch with my Dutch heritage, if you like, because I was an Australian through and through by the time I was 10 years old.
Sure.
And it was only later in life when I sort of connected music and these recordings, and I thought, oh yeah, well, actually I was born there. I should go back there sometime. And so I developed a bit of a thing for that orchestra, and so I returned to Holland and ended up studying in Amsterdam. And I was very fortunate because in my time in Australia as an undergraduate and after my tertiary study, I'd had good opportunities to play with the orchestras here, like the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra and the what is now the Victorian Orchestra, Orchestra Victoria. So I was, as a performer, reasonably experienced symphonically, and so when I studied in Amsterdam, apart from I was working on solo material, of course, but I always took a Strauss tone poem or things that I found challenging in the orchestral setting to my teacher, and he found that unusual. I was, at the end of a lesson, say, oh, by the way, can I just spend some time with you on this? So I made a point of always referring to orchestral material as well, the challenging orchestra. So and that must have made an impression because 2 months after I was there, one of the bass players in the bass section of the Concerto Barrel developed a problem with his hearing. He became ill, and I was invited to play in the orchestra from that time on, which I did until I left again. So that was, as you can imagine, was an amazing time of life for me. It's still in the time of Bernard Haitink, and it was sort of the last year of his chief conductorship, and the following year was Ricardo Chailly, his first year. So it was both the tail end of an incredible relationship between that orchestra and the conductor, and being able to play some of the works of Mahler and Bruckner and Beethoven with Bernard Haitink, who, that relationship was so finely tuned, and just to feel part of this amazing machine as a little cog, and just to try to work well in that position and not get in the way, and just to experience this incredible, well, it was an incredible product, really. That was just a wonderful thing. And then also spend a year and a half working with a fresh conductor who wanted to, impose his vision of music and his way of working with that orchestra. So he worked really hard with that orchestra to re-rehearse in a way that he wanted the orchestra to be flexible and change. It was very intensive. So I got to see some really interesting sides of how it is that a conductor, a really great conductor, can work with an orchestra, and what effect that has. Yeah.
How many music directors have you seen come and go in your time in Sydney? I'm sure more than how many? Yeah.
Well, I guess the average tenure of our chief conductors tends to be around between the 5 and 7 years. I would say we would quite regularly. We would have an initial 3-year appointment with a 2-year extension, unless something goes horribly wrong. So that is the average. And then towards the 5 years, you'd extend by a year or two, depending, because you've got to be, it's got to work for the conductor, obviously, because they might be wanting to be moving on to another orchestra, and therefore they need some flexibility, or would like a year less or a year more. That sort of conversation has to be had. The longest tenureship we've had in recent history, or in my time, was with Ado de Waart, and that was a 10-year relationship with Ado, and he was tremendously important for us. It was a time of change for the orchestra. We had divested the orchestras in Australia. The state orchestras were being funded through the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, so federal government money going through the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and then the ABC would manage their own state symphony orchestra, right? So, and then that changed in 2006, and we divested, and we started taking care of our own financial affairs, if you like, still with government support, of course. And so that was a big change. And Ado, who came in he started in 1993. Sorry, it wasn't 2000. It was 1996. 97. I'm sorry, I got the wrong decade. So he was there from 1993 to 2003. So he was there, being involved, of course, in a big way, helping shape the orchestra. and also was there when, to deal with some of the hard decisions. He was someone who was willing to take on some of the hard decisions of recruitment within the orchestra, and those are difficult conversations when
for sure.
It might be time where we need to think about transitioning some of the key positions of the orchestra, and that is a challenging time. And he was one who was prepared to be part of that, and not everybody is,
Yeah.
So, and he was a very important person for us. He also instigated a deeper relationship with the Sydney Opera House. It was he who helped us to establish our rehearsals at the Opera House as opposed to rehearsing elsewhere and just coming into play at the Opera House. That was a big thing for us.
Yeah, how did that change? Because I know that has a huge impact on the group. Wow, did the group start to play differently when you all of a sudden had the same space to be rehearsing in?
Yeah, because we were rehearsing in a, it was adequate but not ideal. So the issues of balance, and that's such a huge thing in a large group. I mean, balance, in a way, we probably don't talk about balance enough, but balance between instruments, small or large groups, makes such a difference to what something sounds like, of course.
Yeah.
And so you can balance if you can balance whilst you're rehearsing, as opposed to having to do that just in the morning of a concert, which you have to do when you're touring internationally, etc.
Right.
Of course, but that's where touring is great for an orchestra, because it enforces a flexibility and an ability to make quick decisions. But if you have to do that on a weekly basis, you're far better off not having to deal with that on the one day, and just to be able to do that during your rehearsal process. So that was a very important thing for us to be, and it just made the orchestra work more efficiently, and it just gave a sense of security in what we were doing. Yeah.
Well, speaking of touring, I know there are highs and lows to touring.
Yeah.
and getting a chance to play in some of those concert halls you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then I've talked to colleagues for all sorts of different orchestras that have had, just the most hilariously weird performances. Any favorite highs or lows from your life on the road?
I can talk about the many highs first.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, look, I mean, sometimes you get to play. I mean, the Sydney Opera House is a wonderful place to play, but acoustically, there's room for improvement, I would say. They're performing in some of the great halls in the world brings an incredible pleasure, of course. And I will never forget, the orchestra toured the United States in 1998 with Ado, and one of the greatest experiences for me was our sound check in Boston Symphony Hall, and that feeling of what you get from the stage in that venue. I remember, in a way, that whole tour we played at Carnegie Hall, we played at Kennedy Center, Boston, many other venues, but the defining moment for me was that first 15 minutes, half an hour in that hall, and it was so rich and beautiful, and for a bass player, it's such a great response there. I loved it. And I was able to hear the Boston Symphony I just stayed around in the US for a month, listening to hanging around with the bass sections of the various orchestras.
Oh, cool.
And I got to hear concerts in Boston and
nice.
Philadelphia and New York. And
wow.
Anyway, I was just a real bass tart and loved it. And yeah, it was just, you just remember the sound of those halls, they're beautiful. So that was one. More recently, the Elb Philharmonie in Hamburg was,
is this the new place in
Yes,
Hamburg?
yes.
Yeah, I've heard it's incredible.
It is. It's very hard to get into as an audience member or a performer because it's booked out so solidly.
Okay.
But we played there in November, December last year, and yeah, incredible experience. Just this, it's almost a visual image. We played Mahler's Fifth Symphony, and the big moments where the orchestra really talk off, and I can still see the sound of the orchestra just rising above the stage, and just sitting in this space. I've never experienced this before. I could almost see this incredible, rich sound just sitting above the orchestra. I thought, wow, I've never experienced this before.
Oh,
There's something about it. It had and I know they're still fine-tuning the acoustics apparently, but it was a beautiful experience. Another one, I'd never played in the Philharmonie in Berlin before, and that was, the history of that hall is incredible, and just so it's both the sound and the history it really stays with you. Yeah, some great experiences. I've had some other more interesting ones as well. I guess you were asking me this because I had spoken.
I'm leading Case on this very entertaining story you told me a few days ago.
So we tour Asia quite a bit. It's close to us, and there's an appetite for classical music performance in China. Particularly, we've been to China pretty much on a yearly basis. And there was one particular, because there are some really excellent halls in China too, but there was one, we arrived at, I think the city is Xinan, not to be confused with Xi'an, which is the Terracotta Warriors.
Okay,
city.
yeah.
But Xinan, and it's one of those cities within a city where like they've just seemingly constructed the infrastructure for a city of 8 million people. There just happens to be nobody there yet, but all the buildings are there, and incredible grand open places, and one of which was the hotel where we're staying, which was still, you could still smell by the glue, was still being constructed, it seemed. And but the concert hall also, this fabulous new concert hall we arrived at, and we were playing the Beethoven Emperor Concerto with a local soloist, and who was giving the piano a bit of a workout, I've got to say. Not always the most delicate touch. And so we rehearsed the work, and then we arrived in the afternoon, had a quick rehearsal, and then performance after a meal break. So we rehearsed in the afternoon, and during the break I just took the opportunity just to play my bass a little bit, just to keep the fingers going, and I heard this sound of what I thought was a tam-tam just falling over this onto the stage, and I said to our principal percussionist, "Oh, you better have a look. I think someone's just knocked something over." And we looked on stage, and there was a massive hole in the stage, and where the piano lift would be, there was this big hole. We looked over the edge, and there was this beautiful new Steinway piano lying 20 feet below in pieces. And we looked at each other, and we decided the piano had decided to commit suicide, I think, and had just given up. Anyway, we were assured that if a little platform was put on top of this hole, that we would be fine, and our colleagues in string section were not too pleased about that and decided they wouldn't do that. So we were instructed to walk 3 minutes down a hallway, open the door, and there was a brand new opera theatre, also 2,500 seats, where we just took all our equipment there. The concert started half an hour late, and we played there instead. And all the audience were just funneled into that hall. And whilst we were playing, we reversed the order of the program, so the second half was performed first. And in that time, we saw these gentlemen carrying a brand new Steinway in for the soloists to perform in the second half of the concert, so nobody was unhappy. Amazing experience.
That is one of my all-time favorite orchestral stories.
Upton Bass is at a fascinating transition from selling accessories online, kind of in the early days, to selling other people's basses, to starting to make their own basses, which they now do and make over 120 a year. Here are Eric and Gary of Upton Bass on that transition.
So then we stopped getting containers of instruments.
Right, yeah.
Which was
a lot of dough all at once. So it was taxing, and the quality was going down with every shipment, And at that point, we were doing so much ourselves anyways, final assembly, varnish, setup. It was kind of a no-brainer to start making them in-house.
Whatever your playing needs are, Upton Bass will find you an instrument that works with your budget and that you will love for the long term. They have an amazing, loyal fan base that has bought, several people have bought 2, 3, even 4 Upton Basses over the years. They stand behind their products. They're beautiful instruments made in the Northeast in the United States. UptonBass.com, and thanks so much for sponsoring the podcast. Colstein Music has been supplying the bass world and the music world in general at this point with great services and products for over 60 years. It was started by Samuel Colstein and has been run by Barry Colstein, who I've had on the podcast, and they are just such a great company for anything you need for basses. They've got a great selection of instruments. They've got a great selection of bows, accessories, and just a great bunch of people working behind the scenes. Barry has been a true friend to the bass community for so long, and it's so great to have Colstein supporting the podcast. Learn more about everything that they do at colstein.com.
The Sydney Symphony has a pretty great YouTube channel, and they have a video of your practice space on there.
Okay.
And you hey, check out, and you've got this amazing space for you and Kirsty and your basses that you built, right?
Oh, are you talking about at my house?
At your house,
oh,
yeah. Sorry,
yes.
not the.
No, I thought you meant that we owned a little room at the Opera House, which sadly we don't.
No, you weren't aware of it. Yeah,
by the way. Yeah, that was a story about musicians and where they practice.
Yeah,
because it's an issue, of course, for everybody. And Sydney's a fairly cramped place in the city, so we had an opportunity to put a studio in the backyard, which. Well, we love totally. It's called a cabana, actually. Apparently, that's a technical name for it. And it's big enough, 20 square meters of space where we have our instruments and we teach, and there's room for 3 or 4 people to play at the same time. So yeah, it's a great place, separate from the house. We have 2 children. It's not a big house, just enough rooms to make do, and to have a separate space for our instruments and to be able to practice, and just to walk 10 minutes out the backyard. Close the door and spend some time. It's as anybody would appreciate. It's good to be able to have that. Yeah,
it's very cool. I'll make sure to link up to that because it's a really fun. It's a fun video because you're come into my practice space. Then you
that's right.
launch into I don't remember what you played Bottesini or something like that. Yeah,
right.
There was another story that came out kind of recently that I thought was interesting. I talked to Kirsty about it. About back in the 90s, I think you had some sort of performance injury, you sat down hard or something.
Yes. Yeah,
what? And I ask. First of all, it's a good story.
Yeah.
Very kind of heartwarming story, but also a lot of people that listen write in and say that they've struggled with something, some sort of performance injury. So can you just talk through what?
Well, it was significant. I know that. I guess it started innocuously enough. I just sat down in a chair. That was way back in... I started in the symphony in 1990. And, things get busy. I was busy. I had just toured through Europe with a contemporary music trio, playing some challenging extremities music, meaning Brian Ferneyhough inspired, full-on, all over the bass kind of thing. And I was busy, and I came back to the orchestra, and there was a lot of stuff going on. And I just happened to sit down after a concert and slam my elbow into the armrest of a chair, and I hitting the funny bone in a serious way. And at that time I didn't know how to just take a call off and just stop for a while and just let it recover. I kept playing these concerts, and it developed into something much more serious, and my left arm just started not functioning properly, to the point where one of my fingers just wasn't operating properly, and I had to stop. I ended up having to stop playing for 3 months until this came back. It was a nerve injury, and nerve injuries take a long time to recover, And that sort of came and went over the next 2 or 3 years, and various parts of my left side of my body seemed to be affected by this on a couple of occasions, and that sort of stopped me playing for a while on each of those occasions. And it was a very frustrating time, as you can imagine, and very challenging for me. It seemed like my body was sort of saying, look, this is something, it's too much, and you need to know how to slow down or stop or just take a break every now and then. And I guess it taught me, everything did recover. The sort of Western medicine specialists, I saw everybody under the sun. I was trying to find anybody that could help with my situation. We were touring a little bit of the time. I was still able to play on and off. And we traveled through Europe. I went to see specialists in Paris and London and Hanover and, anybody that I could. I was just following leads to see what it was that was affecting me like this. And in the end, in time, it recovered to the point where I was able to play and sort of 100% recovery. But it was the last period where I wasn't playing, which was over about a 7-month period. It took me 7 months to just recover all of my strength, my left side of my body particularly, and I went through a process of having to rebuild all the muscle groups in that side of my body that had all just started diminishing, and but no, I was never really able to get a firm answer on what was going on. And I guess what it was for me, you have to have some sense, develop a sense of what's happening to yourself. And for me, an injury, sustained injury, where I wasn't able to realize the significance of it and take steps just to either slow down, to say no to a few things, or just play lightly for a couple of days. Like my answer to a problem in my left hand, if my thumb position wasn't working well, is to go into practice room and practice thumb position for 3 hours. That's not always the most sensible thing if there are injury concerns. But that was my way up to that point. My way of dealing with anything to do with playing was to work harder. At this point, I needed to learn how to not play for a day or play lightly for 2 or 3 days, just to let the thing subside, because my body was complaining about it, right? I just didn't understand those signals, and it took me a long time. It took me a few years to understand how to listen to what my body was saying, and over the following years, little twinges of this or that would happen, and I learned how to acknowledge it and just to slow down for a day, or that thing of playing lightly. You can play very vigorously. You can also play very effectively by just using minimal effort, minimal left hand pressure. Let's say there's a certain amount you do need to activate the string. It's possible that you don't need to overdo it too. And that was a learning curve for me over a period of years, which I'm grateful that it happened to me at a time when I was still able to recover and to get full recovery, as opposed to if it happened to me now, I might find things would be much slower to recover. So in that sense, I learned a lot about myself in those years, which I think have held me in good stead subsequently.
Yeah, it seems like performance injuries can be a lot more sort of the exact cause can be a little bit cloudy for people all the time.
Absolutely.
And then the solution also, it's a lot of the time it's not just one, it's like you're describing, like just a little bit less of this and a little bit thinking about this and taking care. Sometimes it's not a radical reason for or solution.
No. Well, it's a very personal thing, right? I mean, I guess, it's easy to want to pinpoint something that's happening to someone and say, yes, it's that. And it's quite possible it is that, but it's likely there's a bit of that, or it might be that, or it's something different. Like we all function differently, and the things I had to deal with ultimately, I had to learn to deal with those things for myself. I had to develop an understanding for myself. I also had to have what was important for me is to develop a sense of confidence that I thought I knew what it was. I had to retain that always, no matter what I was told. It's a little bit like you performing, and someone says, "Jason, that was absolutely amazing," and someone will say, I hated that. And I mean, what do you take from performance when you can get any number of views or none at all?
Right.
As a performer, if you don't develop a sense of when you perform and when you finish, you have to know how you rate that performance for yourself against your benchmark that you would set for yourself. That I think that is, as a performer, the most important thing for me is to know what I'm aiming for, and to know when I finished, did I achieve what I was trying to achieve? If I did, with maybe a few warts and all, it's hard to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. But to get a sense of how you performed in relation to what you set for yourself, that is, for me, number one by a long way. Other people's opinions on top of that are welcome or accepted, whatever, but that's secondary, So, and I think on the health front as well, I mean, trying to develop a sense of where you are. If you're dealing with something, you want to get some sense of understanding what it is and to find your way of dealing with it. And my way of dealing with what I had I learned was very different to what a lot of other people who are dealing with similar things. But so I tried to stay very positive. I tried to stay focused on it. A big thing for me was there was a time when I had the long break, 7-month break, where I thought, okay, I've been told by any number of people, you're not going to play again. You're not going to recover from this to a point where you can play professionally again. And I thought, I just went through that whole thing. Okay, if that's the case, what else do I want to do? Think of something different. And in the end, the thing that I most wanted to do was to play the bass again, because I've always just loved the sensation of playing it, of it. And that hadn't diminished. And I thought, well, screw this. I'm going to get better. I want to get back playing. And I made that decision. Then I worked like crazy. I just exercised for 8 hours a day for 7 months, just rebuilding every part of my body that wasn't working. Against, and the advice I was getting from specialists was probably pretty pointless.
Yeah.
Also at that time, Kirsty and I, as a couple, decided that's the time, and through this period we were going to get married. We bought a house. We took on financial liabilities. And at over the last period, that 7-month period, I also bought that beautiful lot bass that I performed with last night, which anybody else would say you're stupid taking on a commitment like that just when you're being told you're not going to play again. And I thought, no, well, this is my message to myself that I'm going to get back. And when I get back, I'm going to have a beautiful bass to play. And it was important for me psychologically to have that as a motivator. So I tried to, ended up making some decisions, life decisions, serious ones financially, that happened at the time when, a lot of people weren't sure that I was going to be able to do it. And it motivated me, because I knew that was still the thing that I wanted to do more than anything else. So there was a lot of that, and that's very personal, of course. You can't advise people this sort of stuff.
Right.
You've got to make a decision for yourself. So I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about how much music means to me and what the bass means to me. And yeah, that was I wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but that was, in a lot of ways, that was the makings of me as a person, and has inspired me to, anytime I play a great work, like the Messiaen, for instance, I just don't know if I'll ever get to play it again. So what are you going to do? On the day that you play the Triangulate Symphony, you give it everything. I felt the same last night. When's the next time I play a recital? I don't know. We might be injured next week. You just give it everything, right? Because you just don't know when you might get an opportunity again. So in a way, it's been a good thing for me to stay positive and focused and motivated, because I also know what it feels like for all that to be taken away and to be told, look, you're not going to play again. That's a big thing to be told. Yeah,
that's a huge thing to be told. Yeah. And how like kind of putting that pressure, seemed sometimes just telling yourself, by God, this is the way it's going to be. A way opens up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, you've got to have a sense of purpose, right? You've got to have, in anything in life, you've got to have a reason for doing things. And that was a time when all the big ticket items were questioned. And there was a time when I thought everything I was doing was pointless because body was just not functioning anymore. And sort of I questioned everything. And to get through it eventually was a real process.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you were able to get through it.
I'm very glad too.
Somebody and to get a chance to hear you on that lot and hear you at the Opera House and get a chance to spend some time in Melbourne. It's really it's incredible. Yeah, we got to do this again sometime.
That'll be great. It's great talking with you. It's great meeting you as well.
Kees, thank you so much for chatting. That was such a blast. And I didn't mention it at the outset, but we also chatted, I chatted with Kees's wife, Kirsty McCann, who is a fabulous bassist and just an all-around outstanding person, and a lot of fun. That was a great chat. Also live, of course, in Australia, in the Botanic Gardens, and that came out maybe a month ago or something like that, 3 weeks ago. I'm not sure exactly, but definitely go back and check that out in the podcast archives. More to come from Australia. We've put out a bunch, but I have several more in the can here, and I'm just thinking about what the next trip's going to be. I love doing these live kind of quasi-journalistic trips, going to a place like Australia, or like I did in 2018, going to New York City for a week to chat with people. I want to try to do that once a year. Just go for a week or longer if it's someone as far away as Australia, and chat with people. And I'm just kind of thinking about what the next trip's going to be. Any thoughts? Let me know. Feedback at ContrabassConversations.com. I'd love to hear from you. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, and Krista Copper. If you're looking for a great new podcast to listen to, The Backstage Creative is done by Krista, and I love the topics and the guests and what she explores there. And if you're looking for a double bass, Mitch is making award-winning double basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.